Hey everybody, it's Helen Moses, your voice and communication strategist, and I am here with Tara Nixon for the fifth in this series of interviews leading up to World Voice Day 2022. Tara Nixon is a speech language pathologist and a clinical specialist. She is also a singer, beautiful voice, and she is here. She works at the Duke Voice Care Center. I know a lot about that. We'll talk about how I know a lot about that as we get going, but let me just welcome Tara first.
Good morning, Helen. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm really pleased that you are the last of these 5 interviews, because we're going to get to talk a lot about taking care of the voice. And as you and I both know, that's really why World Voice Day was started, was to bring up awareness about the voice and how to take care of it and not to take it for granted, which is what I'm always preaching to people. Don't take your voice for granted. So let's just start off by having you tell us a little bit more about you, how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yes, so I have been a speech pathologist for nearly 10 years. I started first as a singer and a voice teacher. I received my master's in vocal performance at Appalachian State. And through kind of a random series of events, I found out about speech pathology and the need for people with singing voice experience within speech pathology to help singers with vocal health issues. And so I went down that path. I became a speech pathologist. I did my final clinical externship at Duke Voice Care Center, and they hired me, and I've been working there since. And so that is one of my specialties, and probably the kind of largest population that I work with are singers who have encountered some difficulty with their voices.
Yeah, and great, thank you. And I love that combination. I actually have a bachelor's degree in vocal performance, and then I went back to get my master's degree in speech therapy. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the things that when I worked with you, which I'm getting ready to share with people about, that I love, because we were kind of speaking the same language. We both knew a lot of the basics, but I'm sure I know that you're able to work with people who don't have the speech therapy background, or even a singing background, to help them understand how to take care of their voice. Just real quick, I started going to Duke Voice Care Center because my singing voice was really having some difficulty. And tell me if this is not true, Tara. Is it not true that people, as they get into the middle-age years, may find that their voice is changing some, and that there's having some difficulty? Is that common?
So that's a great question. And I think I will say first that people at any age can have difficulty with their voices. I've worked with people from age 3 to 93. I think in the middle years, certainly, there can be some hormonal changes that can happen. For females, for cis females, typically, the changes can happen with vocal fold edema, some kind of polypoid edema that can happen. And for cis males, typically it can be more of kind of like a vocal fold atrophy. But of course, there are exceptions to the rules,
right,
or to what you might think. But something that I think is important to know is that people with extensive vocal demands, singers, teachers, coaches, preachers, anybody in the public eye who has more demands on their voices, parents, are considered vocal athletes and use their voices more athletically than the average person. So that can lead to more injury.
Yeah. Thank you for all of that. That's a great point. 3 to 93. Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, I know my difficulty had a lot to do with what was called muscle tension dysphonia, which means that I was basically straining my muscles around my voice box too much when I was singing. And so I remember you taught me a lot of ways to relax it and help. So this is a question for you. And at the Duke Voice Care Center, if you talk a little bit more about the kinds of people who show up, the kinds of problems that they have singing and speaking, what are some of the most common things that you see?
So are you asking kind of the most common symptoms or the most common diagnoses?
Let's go both. Let's start with symptoms first.
Yeah. So a lot of times people will show up, and particularly for speaking voice, they'll say, my voice is getting hoarse, or my voice feels breathy. I feel like I can't project my voice like I used to. My voice is getting tired at the end of the day. I feel like I can't bounce back after a day of speaking like I used to. Sometimes people will come in with just a complete loss of voice, where their voice is pretty normal at one point, and then all of a sudden they don't have a voice. So those are some of the main symptoms. And we see diagnoses all over the map. Muscle tension dysphonia is a very common diagnosis that can be associated with other injuries. So, and the reason for that is because, say, for example, somebody has a vocal fold paralysis. So our vocal folds open as we're breathing, and then they close and vibrate. It's actually kind of in this shape within our neck. And if one of those vocal folds becomes paralyzed, then it can't open and close to get the voice that we want and need to communicate. So the various muscles in the throat will kind of overcompensate for that injury to try to get the voice out. And the same thing can happen if we have any sort of what's called a phonotraumatic lesion, vocal fold polyp, cyst, nodules. The muscles, again, just kind of, they do their instinctive job, which is to try to just get the vocal folds to close and vibrate to get that voice out. So I would say that, yes, vocal fold paralysis or atrophy, kind of a bowing, weakening of the vocal cords, muscle tension dysphonia, those phonotraumatic lesions like nodules, polyps, cysts, edema, just kind of a general edema of the vocal cords. We do see laryngeal cancer, and sometimes kind of a fungal laryngitis. We see things all over the map.
Well, let's break down some of these clinical terms.
Oh, yes.
Because I know what you're talking about, but I don't know if everyone else does. So first of all, why is it called laryngitis?
Oh, that's a very loaded question. A good question. So laryngitis is essentially an infection of the larynx. And so the larynx is considered the voice box. It's what houses the vocal cords, which vibrate to get our voices out through our vocal tract and out to the person we're talking to. And so laryngitis is some sort of infection of the larynx. A lot of times, there are many different types of laryngitis. There can be kind of the fungal laryngitis, where there's kind of a fungal infection. There can be viral laryngitis, where kind of randomly you get a virus and you lose your voice. There can be bacterial, many different types. And I think some people use the term laryngitis just generally as kind of a voice loss identifier. I lost my voice, I have laryngitis. So that's not how we typically use it clinically, but a lot of times people will describe it that way.
Thank you for that definition, because I think most people have heard of laryngitis, right? But that's a neat description of why it is related to the larynx, and that there are multiple ways that it can happen. So let's also talk about some of the other terms you used. You said something phonic lesions.
Oh, phonotraumatic lesions.
Phonotraumatic lesions. Okay.
Yes.
Tell us about those. Break
So
that down.
So great. You're asking all the good questions, important questions. So phonotrauma, phono refers to where we create sound, where we phonate in our vocal folds, in our larynx. And so phono refers to the sound. Trauma, of course, refers to the trauma that the injury at the level of those phonating objects, the vocal folds. So when we have a phonotraumatic lesion or lesions, essentially that is where there has been a lot of repetitive use, a lot of contact, forceful contact of those vocal cords that can lead to kind of a callus at the level of the level of the vocal cords, which can then lead to hoarseness, which can lead to these symptoms that I mentioned: vocal fatigue, challenge projecting. In terms of singing, it can, of course, change a person's range. A lot of times people with this phonotrauma, it creates kind of a mass effect of the vocal cords, which can lower pitch. It can limit the high pitches that we can reach. It can be challenging to create a softer sound, so our dynamic levels become limited. We get cracking and breaking. A lot of times you might have challenges kind of traversing through the registers of the voice. So many more symptoms that can occur for our singer patients as well.
And that was some of what I was experiencing. And one of the reasons I made an appointment to come to Duke was because I was scared that I might have one of these, what I call big bad voice lesions, which I haven't been using the term phonotrauma event, but that's what I was scared of. And there is the problem with, as you just described, you might have all these symptoms, which could be related to the muscle tension dysphonia. Dysphonia, by the way, meaning sound is off, phonating is off. But it also could be an indication of one of these lesions. And it's a bigger type of issue, sometimes leading to surgery, requiring surgery, sometimes vocal rest for a very long, extended period of time. And I was really, really concerned about that. So we can't know from the outside if someone has the hoarseness because of muscle tension, or if they have hoarseness because of one of these lesions from extra vocal use or abuse. So tell us a little bit about how you find out which way it is.
You are exactly right. There is really no way to know what a person's diagnosis is, what is happening at the level of the vocal folds, without taking a look. And so what we do at the Voice Care Center, at Duke Voice Care Center, is we do what's called a video laryngostroboscopy. I won't make anybody spell that, but we call it a strobe for short, or stroboscopy, where we take this kind of thin tubular camera and place it in a person's nostril and travel back through the nostril to get down to the throat and have them vocalize. It takes about 2 minutes. It's actually a pretty pain-free, mostly easy experience. You could breathe and talk the whole time. One of the speech pathologists, myself included, guide the patient through this and take them through some different sounds where we can evaluate what's happening when the vocal cords are moving and vibrating. We get a really, really detailed picture of the vocal cords and the nose and the throat. We can even see up into the kind of upper part of the trachea, the upper esophageal sphincter, kind of the very top of the esophagus, back of the tongue. So this gives us, alongside our laryngologist, our ENTs who specialize in voice, a really good view of the vocal cords. And then the laryngologist gives the patient a diagnosis, which allows us to determine what next steps would be appropriate. And you mentioned, Helen, voice rest being at times an option to help with the healing. Surgery at times is appropriate or recommended. Another option is voice therapy. And I would say that that's oftentimes what is kind of the topmost recommendation for many of the injuries that we see. And, that can take anywhere from just a couple sessions. It's kind of like physical therapy for the voice, but it can be a little bit more extended as well. And there are 11 of us at Duke Voice Care Center that work with our patients. We all kind of specialize in different things. And there are 3 of us who are singing voice specialists who work with our singers.
Yeah, voice therapy. That's in fact what I did. I worked with you for voice therapy to get my singing voice a little bit freer and remove some of the tension that was causing the problems that I was having, which were, I'd come to choir practice and I'd come home and I couldn't talk. I had laryngitis, right? That's what I would say. My voice would go away because I was using it so much. And it was embarrassing for me because, I'm a singer. I have a degree in vocal performance. I'm a leader in the choir and I'm singing, and either my voice will not come out completely when I'm trying to sing certain notes, or it comes out, but it's squeaky or just, and that was really embarrassing for me. And I just share that in case there's anyone out there who is in a similar position, because you guys, and there are other people besides Duke, but I'm just highlighting Duke because it's you, Tara, and that's where I went. And you have a fabulous service there. It's okay to go, but our voices are very precious instruments, very precious and priceless. And so here's an odd question that I'm going to ask you, that I like to ask people just because it's just something most people haven't thought of. And here's the question, Tara: how would you do what you do if you couldn't speak?
I think that would be so challenging. And I want to just go back quickly to what you described about being embarrassed that you didn't have a voice. I think that is actually a common thread, I think, between professionals who really depend on their voices, and have to work with people with their voices and sing and are known for their lovely singing voice. And it can be kind of a taboo thing or an embarrassing thing. It puts us in a vulnerable state, doesn't it, to not be able to use our voices to connect. And I read about this in your book, your lovely book, that described, you described this feeling like you needed to know how to fix it. You needed to know what to do. And really you learned that you can ask for help. And I think that's hard for so many of us, especially women, to do. Might I say that? And
yes.
And so I think that is probably one answer I would give you, is I would ask for help. I would write for help, to kind of garner the support of the people around me. I might go into a different career because I don't know if I could do what I would do if I couldn't sing. I would probably end up working with animals instead because I love animals.
That's neat.
But yeah, I would ask for help. I think I would probably learn to make music in a little bit of a different way, because I just love it, if I didn't have my voice. And I'm actually, interesting that you asked this question. I'm reading a book right now where one of the main characters does not have a voice. And she is, it kind of describes how she's so expressive with her face. She learned sign language, right? So that is another wonderful language to use. I would definitely learn sign language. Apologies, I'm getting mucusy just thinking about losing my voice.
So true, so true.
So I don't, these are just conjectures, but I think it would be really, really hard, but I would ask for help.
I love that answer. I love, love, love that answer. We're not in this by ourselves, are we?
We are not.
And even something as devastating as losing one's ability to speak may be, there's still others on our team. They're people we can ask for help, however that looks, to communicate that request. But I think that is like a perfect answer, just right. And so thank you for thinking through that with me and sharing that with others. I just remembered I wanted to go back and ask you another anatomy question, because you've mentioned vocal cords and you've mentioned vocal folds. Now, before I studied anatomy and learned about what the vocal mechanism is really like, I had pictured in my mind vocal cords like two strings on a guitar. But then you start talking about folds and this action. Can you please tell us more, but what's the difference?
Yes. So vocal cords and vocal folds are interchangeable. We use both terms to mean the same thing. And I wish I had a picture that I could easily pull up, but maybe if your listeners and audience members wanted to just Google larynx, Larynx, you could actually visualize the vocal cords just at your leisure. And I've had patients kind of describe it. It looks alien-like, and it's essentially kind of a V shape. So the vocal cords open up and close, vocal cords or vocal folds. And it is a series of kind of a ligament, muscle, and then this beautiful mucosal layer, I think it's beautiful, that vibrates almost like jelly. But again, when we have any sort of phonotrauma or challenge to the vocal cords, that jelly-like layer becomes very stiff and makes it challenging for that jelly to vibrate, which impacts our voices.
Thank you for the jelly image. I think that really helps to have someone envision what might be going on there. And I think you're right. Just look it up online and see the magic for yourself. I know there are demonstrations, videos that show these vocal cords moving as they do. Before we go, I know you mentioned my book, so thank you for that. And I'm going to just plug it. I brought it here just because Tara's in it. I write about my story, and it's called Voice Unleashed: Speaking Up with Faith and Courage. And you can find it online, or you can reach out to me if you'd like a signed copy. But I talk about not taking your voice for granted and taking care of it. And so I bring that up now because we're talking about World Voice Day and celebrating it. And that's thank you for mentioning that, but thank you for your help. I'm so much happier now that I've had the voice therapy. And sometimes it still comes back, the old patterns and habits come back. But the difference now is that I do have the tools most of the time. Sometimes I have to sit out and just rest the voice. Some nights that's just the best thing to do. But I have more tools now that I didn't have before. So that's what you do. And I know that World Voice Day is Saturday. It's the 16th of April, which is tomorrow if you're watching this video when it first is released. And then Duke Voice Care Center, though, is doing something a little bit later than that to celebrate World Voice Day. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. So we at Duke Voice Care Center have celebrated World Voice Day for, gosh, I think we might be in our 16th year at this point. We've celebrated with many different kind of formats. And of course, since the pandemic, we have gone virtual. Typically, we've done in-person events. And this year, what we're doing is a webinar on Monday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern. And my colleagues and I have invited our honored guest speaker, Ingela Onstadt, who is a counselor, professional singer, and psychotherapist in New Mexico. She's from New Mexico. but she's joining us virtually to discuss performance anxiety. And so we're going to be having just a kind of a leading a celebration of the voice, but also an educational opportunity. If you're interested in registering for that, I think Helen is going to be providing the link, but you could also visit www.dukehealth.org/World Voice Day. It's free. And if you register, you will, and you aren't able to attend, you will receive a recording of the event. So even if you can't attend that evening, go ahead and register.
Well, thank you for that. I am registered to attend. I love going to these events. Of course, you know, I'm a voice professional, but there's always more to learn. There's always a new perspective. And this topic, performance anxiety, whether you're a singer or a speaker, public speaking, is what is it? You know this, the number one fear that people have. People are more scared of public speaking than of dying. So this is common. This is common. I'm so glad you have someone who's a psychotherapist background. That's wonderful. I encourage everyone to sign up. I will be putting a link in the comments and you can check it out. Do sign up, and then you'll get on the list so you'll know about their future events, because it's a lot of always packed with wonderful information, practical tips, and it's coming from the heart. The people here at Duke Voice Care Center, they really care. And I strongly encourage you to sign up for that. Tara, is there anything that we've said today that that you might take away? What are your takeaways from this conversation?
I think, you know, one thing that you kind of referred to earlier when you were describing, you know, losing your voice, is just the importance of not being afraid to be vulnerable, not to be afraid to use your voice, even when you feel challenged, not to be afraid to ask for help, of course, and to know that we're all in this together, that we, you know, even the most surprising person might have also experienced something similar to you, and that there are resources out there to help you. So that would be my big takeaway. And I want to just mention one thing, because you mentioned kind of speak up with heart, which I just love I love your thematic material there. For one reason, just kind of going back to the anatomy, if I can quickly. Yeah. So the larynx, the vocal cord structure, is innervated by, I'm going to talk about this in the World Voice Day webinar as well, is innervated by the vagus nerve, which is one of the cranial nerves that houses the laryngeal nerve. And a part of that laryngeal nerve actually circles down around the heart and comes back up and innervates the larynx. So when you say speak up with heart, that's what I think about. I think about literally the connection, the intimate connection between our voices and our hearts, and that we are such connected, embodied voices.
I don't really have anything to add to that. That's a beautiful ending to this time. You brought tears to my eyes with that description and those final words. So let's end there. Thank you so much, Tara, for your time today.
My pleasure.